We're heading into the holiday season, and I'm sure for many you're feeling full of joy and hope and love because, well, that's what the holiday season is all about. Taking some time off work, spending time with your family and loved ones, and toasting the end of another year you'd rather forget and replacing it with the usual naivety of hope that next year will be different and things will get better for everyone. Right? But COP28 has just come to a close, and I have the revised advance version, all 21 pages and 196 clauses. So let's take a look, eh? Oh my gods. We are
terribly disappointed by the outcome.
Last week, the 28th United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, aka the Conference of the Parties, aka COP, came to its now usual chaotic closure, with negotiations running over, as it has every year since 2004, a bunch of nations screaming different priorities at each other, and world citizens left feeling unheard, unhelped, and doomed to live in that other timeline.
The time continuum has been disrupted, creating this new temporal event sequence resulting in this alternate reality.
You know, the one where they face forced relocation, wars, famine, and everything else that you do not want to be thinking about 2 weeks before Christmas. I mean, it is the status quo, which is apt for Christmas, but it's also not the good kind. It's depressing. Especially given some of the climate headlines in the last few years. Just last week, Malaga in Spain hit a new record high for December with temperatures in excess of 28 degrees Celsius or 82 degrees Fahrenheit. A good 12 to 15 degrees Celsius, 21 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than it normally is for that region. In December. In the Northern Hemisphere. At the start of this month, there were deadly tornadoes in Tennessee and other southern US states for the 3rd December in a row. And every single month this year has been the warmest month on record for both sea and air temperatures across the globe. But I do want to interject some positivity here because this video is going to be a rough ride. The question before us isn't, can we cut our carbon and not cross the 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming threshold where life starts to get difficult for humans and a lot of other animals and plants on Earth? Because, yeah, we can do it. It's difficult, but it's doable. And we've also seen lots of really great news on that front this year. The price of solar panels keeps falling, and the only way to keep fossil fuel plants going is to subsidise them. Financial companies are starting to prepare for oil and fossil generation and extraction as stranded, worthless assets, or even disastrously loss-making in the not-too-distant future. And in many parts of the world, electrified transport and walkable, livable cities with strong public transportation infrastructure are becoming just what people expect. The question that we're asking, though, is can our politicians and our existing financial structures take us to that future? Or is it going to be a really nasty fight? And the reality is that, for better or worse, we in society, or at least a sizable portion of those of us who live in countries where energy is a commodity you can buy and sell with a click of a mouse button, have failed. We failed in our attempts to limit the amount of anthropogenic climate change that we've caused. We failed in our attempts to be worthy custodians of the planet we live on. We've failed to follow the golden rule, have othered climate refugees and migrants fleeing the socio- and geopolitical quagmire that we and our ancestors helped create through greed and excess. And now, in some cases, some of us are even putting deportation of refugees above creating a cleaner, greener, safer, smarter, and more equitable world for everyone. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. UK Climate Minister Graham Stewart ducked out of the final day of negotiations at COP28 to make a 6,313-mile, 10,150-kilometre round-trip flight to the UK from Dubai, just so that he could vote in the UK Parliament. That trip, equivalent to somewhere between 1.5 to 2 metric tonnes of CO2 per passenger, assuming he was flying a scheduled flight, which I seriously doubt he was, is frankly one of the best demonstrations of the kind of screwed up logic that's been on display this year at COP28. That, and the absolute absurdity of allowing the COP28 host nation to be a country whose entire wealth has been built to date on the fossil fuel industry. A fact that we and other commentators believe was frankly the primary reason why there was incredible resistance to including language in the agreement promising to a phase out of fossil fuels, even though, eventually, a day after the conference officially ended, the final text of the agreement actually includes, for the first time, a written commitment to transition away from fossil fuels. It's about 50 years too late, but at least it's there, right? And let's just spend a moment explaining why Graham Stewart flew back to the UK, because it gets worse and demonstrates just how dysfunctional the UK government and other world governments is right now. The UK government was told back in November by its own Supreme Court that plans penned by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his cabinet to deport refugees and asylum seekers to Rwanda was illegal because Rwanda, under the UK's own laws, was deemed as an unsafe place to be deported to. So on Tuesday evening last week, the British government, having just been defeated on its own first attempt to change the law to classify Rwanda as safe, needed all of its ministers to come back to Parliament to ensure a second attempt was passed and successful. It was, with a majority of 44 votes. I wish I was making this all up, but I'm not. So this means the UK can now deport people seeking safely more easily to a place that's not safe. Because who cares about climate change when you can spend billions of dollars deporting brown people? Sorry. Before I get to the actual agreements as signed in Dubai, let's just make something very crystal clear. The decisions reached during every COP and the treaties that are signed afterwards are usually treated by the world's governments as non-legally binding. Technically, Article 7.2 of the UNFCCC, aka the framework which governs every COP, does appear to be written in a way that could make it legally binding, but I am not a lawyer. And there are actual, factual, real-world lawyers who specialise in this exact type of law, and even they can't say for sure if COP agreements are wholly enforceable. Partly because each signatory nation has its own rules and regulations and protocols for dealing with how it interprets the text of every COP agreement. And as the UK government has just spectacularly demonstrated, most countries, if they don't like something, will change their own laws to fix the things they don't like. So, yeah, COP to date has basically been a jolly for government officials to fly halfway around the world to a different country where everyone gets to talk about the effect climate change has on their homes, and where lots of island nations are given a set of microphones and a podium to tell people firsthand how their homes won't exist in 50 years because sea levels are rising. After which, their needs are promptly ignored. It's where nations traditionally referred to as quote-unquote developing get to explain why, after other nations rapaciously extracted resources from them, they can't be expected to fund all of the mitigations they need to put in place to ensure they can continue to feed their people without mass starvation or submersion. And It's where the so-called quote-unquote developed world gets to engage in some good old-fashioned greenwashing hand-wringing and to make lots of shiny, shiny promises in front of that equally large podium about how they will make things better before going back home and figuring out ways to interpret the text of the agreement that they just signed in a way that allows businesses and industry to continue doing exactly what they've been doing all along. Because money's king. I did a text search for the word requires in this official COP28 agreement. It appears twice. In both cases, the word is used to admit that in order to prevent our global climate from breaking down completely, we have to do something. It just doesn't tell countries that they must. Oh, and because not everyone has read the memo, please do avoid using the term third world or indeed first world. Both terms are frankly old-fashioned and offensive. Even using the terms developing and developed are problematic, and we should, as a whole, try to get into the habit of focusing on referring to countries by their actual names, or perhaps referring to specific geographic regions of the globe. There are links below explaining all of that for those who are interested. The reason we are here today is because COP has never been legally binding. And as climate change's effects have become more and more visible and climate change advocates have become more and more frantic in their warnings, COP's structure hasn't really changed. It's the same now as it was back when it first happened. As Greta Thunberg put it back in 2021, when COP26 was taking place, unless we achieve immediate, drastic, unprecedented annual emission cuts at the source, then that means we're failing when it comes to this climate crisis. Small steps in the right direction, making some progress, or winning slowly equals losing. Or as former Maldives President Mohammed Nasheed told the Financial Times way back in 2019, why can't willing countries come together and go forward? I can't see why we are waiting for every single person to agree that we should not die. Which brings me to the actual agreement as it was finally set in the middle of last week, plus some big key points that, on the face of it, should make for some nice bonuses at the polling booths for career politicians who were there. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, I am mad, and I think you should be too. Progress is progress, and maybe we should be happy that some is finally being made, and that there are some teeny tiny seeds of hope. But as I'm about to explain, COP is little more than a metaphorical naughty child promising not to steal cookies out of the cookie jar while they have one that they've just taken out of the cookie jar hidden behind their back. While early drafts of the COP28 agreement merely suggested that countries take steps to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the actual final text admits that doing so will require, quote, deep, rapid and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions of 43% by 2030 and 60% by 2035 relative to the 2019 level, and reaching net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050, end quote. It calls on countries to take those steps without any hesitation and, to its credit, notes that, quote, sustainable and just solutions to the climate crisis must be founded on meaningful and effective social dialogue and participation of all stakeholders, including Indigenous peoples, local communities and governments, women and youth and children, end quote. It also acknowledges that in transitioning to a cleaner, greener, more sustainable and equitable future, there are substantial chances to help eradicate world poverty too. While it stops short of saying exactly how that would happen, it's of course important to note that sustainable renewable energy projects like off-grid solar and wind turbines are decentralized generation methods that individuals and entire communities can take ownership of, providing said projects are designed and managed to be serviceable by local people using locally stocked parts. And if you haven't already read The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind by William Kamkwamba and Brian Mealer, now is the time to read that, to learn about what decentralized power generation and storage can do for a community. And no, don't just skip and watch the film. That film took some pretty big artistic liberties with the original true story. While all of this sounds great on paper, we know that COP has traditionally been heavy on buzzwords and low on actually setting success criteria. It's all very well and good to say, we need to do the thing, but some of the goals laid out fail to set any kind of official, measurable target. And that means that in some cases, countries can basically set their own arbitrary targets and give themselves a massive pat on the back for achieving them, even if, on a global scale, the resulting reduction is feeble. A good example of this is the phrase in here that says signatories will accelerate efforts towards, quote, the phase down of unabated coal power, end quote. In addition to coal being the dirtiest form of fossil fuel in terms of overall emissions, it's also one of the most commonly used ways to generate electricity in large parts of the world. And that has caused some friction in the international community. It's a commonly quoted statistic that some countries, China and India both regularly get mentioned here, aren't doing enough to curb their respective growth in emissions that both countries have experienced in recent years. And yeah, both China and India did object to some of the language in this agreement, like one that tried to set goals for renewable energy capacity expansion and energy efficiency improvements. Because of their objections, the final text is kind of nebulous enough that both nations can set their own arbitrary goals in such a way that they meet the goals, but where the impact of those goals has little to no effect on the wider global emissions crisis. Clause 51, right here, kind of sets it out in all of its brazen fecklessness. It, quote, calls for urgent, incremental, transformational, and country-driven adaptation action based on different national circumstances, end quote. I'm not going to read you all of the different clauses, and I encourage you to read the entire document because, despite my anger, there are some really good things in it, but those things are completely undermined by the metaphorical shit show of statements like, quote, invites parties to preserve and restore oceans and coastal ecosystems and scale up as appropriate ocean-based mitigation action, end quote, or quote unquote, requests countries that have not met their Paris Agreement targets to, quote, revisit and strengthen the 2030 targets in their nationally determined contributions as necessary to align with the Paris Agreement temperature goal by the end of 2024, end quote. That clause also adds, quote, taking into account different national circumstances, end quote, which is kind of giving everyone a get-out-of-jail-free card. It also expresses with, quote, deep regret that the goal of developed country parties to mobilize jointly $100 billion per year by 2020 in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and transparency on implementation was not met in 2021. I think I might try expressing that kind of deep regret the next time I'm told I didn't pay a bill I was supposed to, and see if I get off scot-free too. Of course, there are other things here that I could detail. I could go on all day. But there are some important ones, including some apparent changes to the way that funding is handled to help countries transition away from fossil fuels, as well as funding programs designed to help nations mitigate the terrible effects of climate change on their citizens. For example, Clause 71, right here, recalls, in other words, cancels, a previous COP agreement that, quote, developed country parties shall provide financial resources to assist developing country parties with respect to both mitigation and adaptation in continuation of their existing obligations under the Convention, and that other parties are encouraged to provide or to continue to provide such support voluntarily, end quote. Now, because this video is actually being filmed the day the agreement was finally signed, so that it's in our queue to be published just before the holidays. I actually have the revised advanced version here. I'm going to be honest that I've not had the longest time to read through this, and I have skim read it. But from my initial reading, it seems, well, while people are hailing it as some degree of a success because it half-heartedly commits to transitioning away from fossil fuels, it is, just like previous agreements, going to be subject from a lot of abuse from member countries. The US, for example, has, save for a short, brief period, remained pretty supportive of COP efforts and has enthusiastically signed on for many years. But while some news organisations will have you believe that the current administration is anti-gasoline and anti-fossil fuels and wants you to stop driving your V8 in preference for a G-Whiz, the reality is very, very different. Sure, the federal government has earmarked billions of dollars to help expand EV charging infrastructure, encourage companies to build EVs and battery packs in the US, offered incentives to citizens buying EVs or installing clean, green, renewable energy on their homes, and much, much more. And we should celebrate those efforts in the US and in other countries around the world where similar efforts exist. But at the same time, the US continues to massively, directly and indirectly subsidize fossil fuel production, and US oil output hit record highs at the start of this quarter. Sure, statistically speaking, the number of new oil wells are falling, but existing oil wells are being driven harder, and analysts predict that the US will add another 500,000 barrels of oil to the nation's output by next year. And by the way, I'm talking about 500,000 barrels of oil per day. Not per year, per day. Like I said at the start, things are pretty shitty. We were always planning on making a deeper, in-depth video on this agreement. So if you are someone who would like us to do that, please tell us in the comments below, and either myself or Kate or all of us will make a video. But given that it's the holiday in a few days, we also wanted to give you a bit more of an immediate reaction, as well as some helpful things that you can do now off the back of COP28. First, let's answer that burning question. Will it do anything meaningful? That, sadly, depends on how seriously the signatories take the agreement and how they interpret it. Their track record is not good. And as I said way back at the start of this video, the language of this agreement is suggestive rather than prescriptive, and it leaves a lot of space for interpretation. About as much space for interpretation as a stream of oil tankers blasting their way through the Northwest Passage so they can get black gold back to the refinery as quickly as absolutely possible. That said, other commentators are also right. This is an historic agreement, but for all of the wrong reasons. It shouldn't have taken 28 years to acknowledge that fossil fuels are the primary reason that we're in this mess, and that solving the mess requires phasing out fossil fuel use. It stops short of banning fossil fuel use completely, and it talks about a whole slew of other technologies that many experts in the field already cite as a massive distraction and waste of time and resources. So yeah, I am doubtful that this will do anything at all. Unless, well, here's where you come in. I know that this is a big document. It's dry, it's depressing, but do yourself a favour and follow the link below to read the agreement yourself. Get to know it. Heck, do what I've done and print it out so that you can cover the page with notes and swear words and highlighted bits. That's what Kate and I both do when we have a report to read. It's not exactly holiday reading, but by familiarising yourself with this document, you can become empowered to hold yourself and your local lawmakers to the challenges laid out and suggested solutions. And in this case, pester power can work. But only if everyone gets on board and writes and calls and pesters their lawmakers to actually do the thing, not just to promise to do it and then forget. We need governmental and societal change in order to make this change happen. We need a concerted effort from everyone. We need everyone to understand and discuss the terms of the agreement, to be able to point to its flaws, celebrate its strengths, and figure out how to stop up the metaphorical holes left for the fossil fuel industry. Put it on your coffee table over the holidays. Encourage your friends and family to learn about it. Because I have spoken to a good 24 people this week who don't read the news and don't watch the news or listen to the news and don't even know about COP28 or even understand what on earth it is. But thankfully, we're also in a world where books like Greta Thunberg's The Climate Book, Extinction Rebellion's This Is Not a Drill, Andreas Malm's How to Blow Up a Pipeline are selling, and selling well. We, the people, are clearly very, very concerned about our collective future. So let's take a moment to remind our representatives and our media that people concerned for our future are the majority, and pandering to the tiny minority who don't believe in climate change is no longer interesting. Remind them that we understand what's at stake and what's in the COP28 agreement, and that we won't accept failure. Because until they realise that, we'll make zero progress. Let us know in the comments below if you want us to dig deeper. Maybe this is something we can revisit in the new year, perhaps with some legal help. And if you are a legal climate change expert and would like to work with us on that video, give us a call. Finally, make those changes to your life that you've been putting off. Frankly, it's not going to be enough for just a few people to make changes. But as the old adage goes, be the change you want to see in the world. Happy holidays. Thanks for joining me today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them below in our Discord chat room, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon. Thanks to the amazing lists of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of the more than 1,500 people who help fund this channel through Patreon and YouTube. They cover our bills, pay our team, and make sure that we as a channel can remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just go ahead and follow the links below. There's a range of different tiers you can sign up for, from as little as $1 a month, or if you pay every year, just under $11. A huge welcome to our newest supporters. They are Patreon user 1124, Gordon Smith, Alan Williams, Tim Nicholas, Jalia Hallett, and Nathan Plowman. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have a good old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at. The address is linked to below. And if you're in need of some swag, you'll find our swag store in the down below as well. We've got some great content coming up, so make sure you're subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube. Again, links below, and we hope to see you again soon. We make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you will enjoy this video, but we here at the channel also think that this one is well worth a look. Thanks for watching, see you soon, and as always, keep evolving!